Hi everyone, thank you for being here. Today's guest is Jason Smith. He is the engaging host of CGTN's podcast, the Bridge to China podcast, where he explores a wide range of topics from economic trends to cultural insights. Known for his approachable style, Smith has also appeared in other CGTN programs like My Life in China, providing audiences with a nuanced perspective on contemporary issues. Smith is also the author of A World Beyond Poverty, China's Roadmap to a Shared Future, which is a thought provoking examination of China's expansive Belt and Road Initiative and its impact on the developing countries worldwide. So, welcome, Jason. Great to have you here. And how are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on your program, Ali. I'm really delighted to be here.
No, thank you for accepting the invite. Really great to talk to you. So, how long have you been living in China?
I moved to China. Well, I moved to Asia in 2010, and then I moved to China in 2012.
So, what made you move to China?
Well, I had a master's degree in history and modern world history, but I had not really seen the world. Like most people in the United States, I'd never left North America. That's more than 90% of US citizens don't leave North America ever. So I thought if I'm going to really understand world history, I should see the world. So I needed to not just travel, but actually live somewhere other than my home country and my home continent. So I moved to Asia because I thought that would give me a more diverse understanding of human civilizations around the world because I couldn't think of anything more different from my own culture than the opposite side of the planet.
So, why China? So, I mean, it makes sense that it's the biggest country in Asia, but why China? Vietnam, Thailand, there are other countries there as well.
Well, I moved to South Korea originally, and I just didn't
Right.
find that it was the right fit for me. Actually, I found that South Korea was actually just like America with Korean speaking because it was like all McDonald's and KFCs and cafes. And I really wanted to try to go somewhere where civilization had really bifurcated from the West, and it was really significantly different. And there is an idea in the United States that China is this other kind of civilization, that it grew up differently. Because if you look at Africa, the Middle East, Europe, we've all been tied together for the last couple of thousand years very intimately. But China has always been on its own kind of trajectory, divided by mountains and expansive distances. So for me, in my own mind, from the way that Americans think about the world, China was this completely other universe. And so, kind of like, living at home in your own home country can sometimes feel like life on easy mode. And I felt like moving to China, with China being maybe Chinese being one of the absolute hardest languages to learn for an English speaker, it's like turning the level of difficulty on the game up.
So, are you fluent in Mandarin or Cantonese?
I learned Cantonese 2 semesters at a junior college after I finished my master's degree, actually. But
Right.
I am a HSK 4 speaker in Mandarin, which is conversant but not fluent.
Right. That's still good enough. Many people don't really know that Mandarin is different to Cantonese anyway. So, yeah. So that's a big, big step. Okay. So what do you do in China? I mean, I know you host a podcast as well, and you work for CTG. And what else do you do?
You mean my hobbies, or I guess my hobbies. I
Work-wise and
like.
hobbies? Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, I do the podcast, The Bridge to China, and I try to invite experts from around the world. As you noted, when we first communicated, I've had people like Jeffrey Sachs, Kyle Chen from
Yeah.
Princeton University, Gordon Zhang from Stanford University. I've had professors from Cambridge and Willamette University and University of Arizona, and also just people who live in China, or experts from Harvard, Mitch Presnick. So I interview a lot of experts who study China from the West or who have lived in China. But I also am active on social media, and that has nothing to do with my work, nothing to do with my job, actually. I am just someone who likes to be active on social media. All my personal social media accounts are mine. A lot of people get confused when I'm on X and they accuse me of doing stuff for China. None of that's China. Those are my legitimate personal opinions. And I'm really active in the defense of the reality of what China is like, because there's a lot of disinformation in the West about what China is like. I live here. This is my personal firsthand experience of life in China. And I know that a lot of the deceptions or misinformation about China are just not true. And it frustrates me. So I go online to show people what China is actually, in fact, really like.
So, you've touched on two things, and I wanted to talk to you about Professor Jeffrey Sachs, but I'll talk
Sure.
to you about that later. The
Okay.
propaganda that you've noticed in the West about China, why do you think that exists? The reason I'm asking is we're living in a digital age. Information
Mhm.
is probably 2 or 3 seconds away. You can search
Mhm.
anything on Google using your mobile phone or anything, iPad, laptop. Why the propaganda still exists?
Well, I don't think there's actually one single reason why there is China hate on the internet. I think there are a lot of different reasons. One of them is, in fact, that the US Congress passed a $1.6 billion bill to actually provide information about China, which highlights China badly. That goes to media organizations, the National Endowment for Democracy, and in fact, private YouTubers and other organizations. I'm not going to call them all out by name. So there is a lot of disinformation about China on the internet that's actually sponsored by the United States government. But there are also just people who maybe they lived in China 10 years ago and then they had a bad experience or whatnot. I know a couple of individuals like that. They had a bad experience and they are just taking it out on China because that's profitable for them. Having a YouTube account with 1 million followers where you just trash China can be very lucrative because there's a lot of Chinese people who are racist and they hate Chinese people or they hate China, or there's a lot of people who've grown up hating Marxism, so they take it out on China. But there's also just a lot of ignorance. There's a lot of people who actually have good intentions. And that's it's because it's all just different reasons. A lot of people have good intentions, like they care about people. They've heard that in China that Uyghurs are oppressed. So they think I'm a good person by calling China out for the way that they treat Uyghurs. But in fact, if you go to Xinjiang and you talk to Uyghurs, they love China. They're actually more patriotic than a lot of other people. So there's a lot of people with good intentions who have bad information. And so they're actually being manipulated to hate China when in fact if they were to come to China they would realize within a day or two that everything that they've been told is not true. So I encourage everyone who is not sure about what China is actually like, please just get on a plane, don't take my word for it. Don't take someone else's word for it. Come to China, experience China for yourself, then you'll know the reality about China.
So, so how do Chinese view foreigners in their land, especially
Well,
Westerners? Then,
that's a great question, but we have to remember when we're answering a question like this, there is no Chinese people. China is 1.4 billion people, and I've been to every province and territory of China. They are all, unique, different cultures. There's 55 ethnic minorities plus the Han majority. So there is actually a very complex tapestry of opinions about foreigners. But my own personal experience has always been positive. I have been treated like a guest. So I try to act like a guest. I don't try, when you go into someone's home, you don't push the furniture around and say, no, no, that belongs over here. You've decorated it all wrong. And like, look, we need to paint this wall blue or whatever. So, I respect the way that China has chosen to arrange its furniture. But also, I'm treated like a guest. When I meet Chinese people, almost always it's like, oh, hey, how are you, where are you from, and they want to know about me, they want to take pictures with me because they're curious. A lot of Chinese people I've seen have been a gap. Like I'm maybe the first foreigner they've seen in some of the villages I've gone to. And so it's always respectful, it's always curious, but we also have to remember that there is no one China opinion, that Chinese people are a diverse, non-homogenous group of people.
so I think that's a great point. Even in a big country like China, you've got different cultures, so it's not a monolithic culture.
Hmm.
Many people will have differing views about foreigners. But do you think how does the Chinese government view Western propaganda? Do they react?
Well, I mean, there are official accounts from the Chinese government, like MOFCOM or the Ministry of Publicity, and there's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they have official spokesperson. You can follow them. Mao Ning is a very excellent voice for what's going on in China and how the Chinese government officially views foreign information, disinformation. So I think you should probably take it from them. If you're curious, go to x.com and find Mao Ning, who is a representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and you can follow her account and what she says. You can also follow the Chinese ambassador to the United States or Chinese ambassadors to many other countries around the world where they officially represent the government. I think, in my own personal opinion, if I'm just talking about how I view it, I would say that the Chinese government is frustrated that there's a lot of disinformation and misinformation in the West about China. And what they're trying to do is show videos and interview people and highlight things that are going on in China to help people understand what China is actually like. The problem with the West is a lot of people don't go to those accounts. They go to like people who hate China's accounts, and then they watch hateful content about China, and that's how they see China. A lot of people, I actually think most Americans know nothing about China. They know that there's kung fu and people like to eat rice and stuff like that. But the people who are interested in China, they are bifurcated into two groups. People who want to know what China is legitimately like, you know, intellectuals and people who've traveled to China, and then people who have been misled, you know, and they are following accounts that paint China in an unfavorable light.
So, I mean, that's very true when you talk of echo chambers, obviously, and that's the tech algorithm as well, feeding you what you want to see, not what should be seen from the other perspective. But surely, in this day and age, with information traveling so quickly from one end of the world to the other end, do people not see that China has made? I mean, I'm going to talk about China's technological progress. Okay, I think China is probably number one when it comes to renewable energy, green energy, and also electric vehicles. Fast becoming number one when it comes to chip production as well. Do people from the West or from Europe and from all of those countries don't see that progress? That progress alone cannot be a product of Marxism or communism. There has to be some practical, pragmatic logic behind the progress that China has made in the last 15, 20 years. Surely exploring that deeper should give people an idea what China is really like when it comes to its own society, developing its own society, its civilization, and making technological progress.
Well, I mean, we're going to talk about economics. That's great because I've interviewed a lot of economists. I'm not an economist, but what I get, like you, I get the opportunity to invite intelligent people on my show, and I spend an hour with them, and I get to ask them all the questions I want to know the answers to. And so I've been interviewing economists for years and years, and what I understand about China's economy is that basically it has utilities. Like the United States used to have utilities where it's controlled by the government, some basic services that are required by the people. But these are called state-owned enterprises. They're basically companies that are operated by the state control and have very little profitability. Usually they are profitable, but it's marginally profitable, not like a corporation. So these operate in things like telecommunications. So the cost of telecommunications is about half of what it is in the United States. Or if you look at electricity, electricity in China is considerably lower than that in the United States. I'm just using the United States as an example because I'm from there. I'm aware that there are other countries. Logistics is controlled by a different set of SOEs. So moving objects around in the corporate world and manufacturing, high-speed rail, planes, slow trains as well, all kinds of other logistics is controlled. And then you look at other kinds of inputs, minerals, state-owned enterprise. So say you're setting up a factory in the United States. Now, you have to pay for logistics, you have to pay for telecommunications, you need to pay for water, you need to pay for energy, you need to pay for minerals to make your product, say you're using steel or whatever. Now, all of these things are going to for-profit enterprises. So your factory, whatever it's producing widgets, is paying an enormous amount, more than twice as much as a factory in China, for getting labor. Just remove labor from the equation for a moment. So setting up a factory in the United States might not be profitable, and you may go out of business. In China, all of those inputs for the capitalist or market part of the economy are based upon the socialist part of the economy. That's why I called market socialism. That is the name that China describes itself as. Sometimes it's called socialism with Chinese characteristics, and sometimes it calls itself a market socialist economy. So it has this complete built market. That's why a lot of people say China's capitalist now. It's not. And then it has this complete socialist and aspiring communist part of the economy, which is controlled by the state or the people. And then that both of them are working with one another. The socialist utility SOE part of the economy is supporting the development of the market side of the economy. So if you have a manufacturing hub in China, you benefit from the socialist part of the economy. So it actually enables the manufacturing and market side of the economy to be more successful than it would have been in another place. Just again, taking labor costs aside. Then you do look at labor costs and then automation. China has half, more than half actually, of all factory manufacturing robots in the world. So labor is actually even cheaper than the cost of labor in China, because if you're a big factory like Huawei and you're pumping out, cars and phones, you have a lot of automation and actually not as much labor as you might have in other countries. So you have all kinds of easy ways for the market side of China's economy to benefit. So when you're looking at solar panels, as the example that you mentioned, there's enormous amounts of automation. There are rare earth minerals that are coming from state-owned enterprises. Then you have other kinds of inputs like logistics. If you want to ship it to shipping hubs, then most of the major ports in China are largely automated. So then you have really low costs to actually have your market economy be much more successful in the international stage. As an American, actually, who wants to see the United States the people of the United States thrive, I would say we need utilities in the United States. I would say that Western Europe needs to rethink its concepts of socialism and stop being so afraid of whatever they were afraid of 100 years ago, and start really thinking about how to integrate SOEs or utility-like business practices into their economies, because China's economy clearly is more developed, more evolved. It's a more advanced form of an economic model that is successful than anything that the West has. So the West either needs to start emulating aspects of China's economy or fall by the wayside. And that's what we're seeing right now. We're seeing the decline of the Western economic model and the rise of China's economic model. The difference is the United States wants to export its model to the world. It's called the liberalization of economies. It uses the World Bank and IMF and other tools to try to export its model to the world. And you see a lot of developing countries that have tried this liberalization, the liberalization of their economies, like the abject failure of Argentina right now. And you see like, wow, that's not working. Well, China developed and it raised hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, and we're experiencing a heightened degree of prosperity. While there is poverty, there's no abject poverty. There's no extreme poverty in China anymore. And actually, that's actually returned to the United States, where there is like 1.25% of people living in abject poverty in the United States by World Bank standards, not by U.S. Poverty standards. There's, of course, other people living by U.S. poverty standards as well, but you have marginal amounts of people in China who are homeless, almost none. You barely see them at all. Whereas you go to a major U.S. city, you see a lot of homelessness. I really think the Chinese economic model is simply more developed, more evolved, and more competitive. And so I think the West is struggling with that, and they are not seeing the reality that they need to be emulating China's model. Instead, the United States and some of its allies are trying to choke China, and that's just not going to work.
No, yeah, that's true. I mean, that's probably one of the best explanations of I've heard Chinese economy, socialist utilities, and then market-based economy on top of that. That's probably the simplest and the best explanation that describes Chinese economy. But your point that Western Europe, no, West and America, they're trying to choke Chinese progress. Obviously, we are seeing the trade wars happening, and nothing's going to come out of it. I don't think anybody wins in a trade war. I think both sides lose. It depends on how long one of the parties can last, and endure the suffering. That's what it's going to come down to. Nobody holds any big cards, in my opinion. It's probably better to make friends and grow through trade rather than wars and fighting. But why is Europe tagging along with America in this trade war? Is it because Europe doesn't really have its own foreign policy anymore? Are they
Well, if you
so
have
much
you,
dependent on
Mhm.
America?
Mm. Well, if you go back to your question about Jeffrey Sachs, you mentioned you wanted to talk about
Yeah.
him. That's exactly what he thinks. When he was sitting with the European partners recently, he said that exact thing, and it's quoted a lot on the internet. Video of him in different speeches saying that Europe needs to, that Europe is a powerful economy that is a $30 trillion economy, the eurozone, and that they need to pave their own way forward as opposed to listening to the United States. But the reality is, Europe is occupied by the United States empire. So, I mean, it's difficult for them to have their own path. I mean, we look back and you can see instances in which Germany discovered that the CIA was spying on its politicians. I mean, it's very clear that that Europe is a vassalized area of the world by the United States and that it's following the United States because it simply doesn't have the ability to project its own power. I would like to see Europe take its own way, but I don't think that Europe is also. I also don't think Europe is just following the United States in everything. The United States just recently requested under President Donald Trump that Europe impose 100% tariffs on China. Did it? No. So yes, it is vassalized to a certain extent, but Europeans are also not committing suicide, economic suicide at this point. So I think that they are aware that they need China, and they're not going to just do whatever the U.S. says. But there is a degree of control there. It's obvious to anyone who's paying attention, even to the Europeans, and I think that they're frustrated with it, and they would like to find a way forward as well. In terms of the rest of the world, I think most countries are actually drawing closer to China because China was able to replace all of its exports to the United States with exports to the developing world. And in fact, China grew 7.2% its exports year on year this year thus far. So not only did China replace its exports to the United States, it grew its exports by more than its total GDP grew. So I don't think for China it quote needs the United States. So, like Victor Gao said, who's a lawyer and who's worked closely with the Chinese government in the past, China doesn't care to acquiesce to the United States demands because China, while it would flourish more, like you said, you know, cooperation between the United States and China, it's doing just fine without a degree of exports to the United States also. So I think China is not going to back down. It refuses to be vassalized. The government will not be second, a second rung under the United States and allow the United States to be a global hegemon. China would like to see a multipolar world where nations around the world come to the table as equals, where small countries with populations of just a few million can sit down with populations of hundreds of millions and be on equal footing and have respect for their sovereign autonomy. And that's what China wants. It wants other countries to respect its sovereign autonomy and for China to choose its own path forward.
That's great. I mean, I'm sort of surprised at Europe's lack of technological progress. I mean,
Mm,
China is so far ahead when it comes to renewables and electric vehicles. I mean, Europe isn't producing any electric vehicle, but they've been
mm,
producing conventional cars for over 100 of years now. But yeah, I mean, I think it's as if Europe has stagnated when it comes to technological progress, and China has
mm,
moved leaps and bounds beyond Europe and anyone else. I also wonder, China's producing so much, who are they going to sell to? Who's going to buy all the stuff that China is producing? I mean, they've got like 10, 12, 15 different electric vehicle companies in China. America has one or two. Tesla comes to mind. There are a couple of others as well. But yeah, in Europe, you can't really name anybody who's
mm.
producing these technological advancements. I'm not sure how Europe's going to compete with China when it comes to technology. that could also be a reason why Europe is aligning itself with America as well. But yeah, the vessel state argument that you made makes sense as well. And when Edward Snowden revealed that that America was spying on its own allies and bucked the politicians of Germany, France, and the UK as well. Yeah, so that comes to mind as well why Europe is probably tagging along with America. So obviously, China's done so well economically. They've pulled most like 600 to 800 million people out of poverty. Are they gonna keep doing well in future as well? Do you see that happening? Obviously, I think the pace of their progress will slow down a bit, but as long as the government is clamping down on corruption, and corruption I know is really big in China, but one good thing that I hear is that the government is really keen on clamping down corruption and corrupt officials. So that's really good. As long as they keep doing that, they will keep making progress. But is the progress going to be as rapid as it has been over the last 15, 20 years, or is it going to slow down?
That's an interesting question. And you see Western headlines frequently for the last 2 to 3 years saying China's economy is slowing. They use the word slowing a lot. And I think this is misleading. And I think it's even deliberately misleading because there's a lot of anti China propaganda in mainstream US media. I mean, the former Singaporean ambassador to the United Nations, Mahbubani, pointed out in a lecture in 2014 at the Harvard Kennedy School that the US media is the most, quote, incestuous media in the world. So ideas that come from the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and so forth just bounce around in this chamber. One journalist says something and everyone else just parrots it for the next 6 months. And you have this awful echo chamber of just not actually understanding, failing to understand. That I think those are his exact words, a complete failure to understand what's going on outside of the United States, especially in places like China. But actually probably extends to other countries to a great deal as well. I'm just in China, and so I notice it. But in terms of growing and slowing, the GDP figure is, I want to talk about this in a couple of different ways. So give me some time here. The GDP growth figure has actually been reduced. So China at one point was growing at more than 10%. And now you see that this year, the World Bank thinks that China is going to grow about 4.8%. And I think it's going to grow about 5%. And I've been right. And the World Bank has been wrong for like the last 3 or 4 years on the GDP growth of China. So I think I actually understand it better than they do. I know that sounds arrogant, but I've been right and they've been wrong. China's official figure that they wanted to achieve in 2024, at the beginning of 2024, they said they wanted to grow, quote, about 5%. They achieved 4.95% GDP growth. And that was despite the World Bank saying that they were not going to make 5%, that they were going to grow about 4.7 or 4.8%. This year in January 2025, the Chinese government said we're going to grow about 5% this year. And the World Bank, again, originally said like 4%, and now they've upgraded it just recently in the last month to 4.8%. And it looks to me like we're on track to hit 5% again, because the Q1 and Q2 were above. They were like 5.3 and 5.1%. And we see exports growing phenomenally and breaking forecasts already in Q3 and moving into Q4. So I really do think we're going to hit about 5%. And why this is important is China set a goal of common prosperity. It's called the Common Prosperity Campaign, following the Poverty Alleviation Campaign. Now, there's so many different parts of this that the West does not understand, that I want to point them out. Even people here in China who advocate for China, people in Chinese media don't understand. China did not raise 800 million people out of poverty. Even I've posted that because it looks great on paper. But in fact, in 1978, there were not 800 million people living in poverty. There were about 130 million people living in poverty. And you can go to the work, the economist, Professor Mick Dunford at Sussex University, who now works out of Beijing, and you can check these figures and why it's misunderstood. A lot of the data prior to 1978 wasn't adequately recorded in the way that it's used. And also a lot of the even Chinese sources that try to look at poverty in 1978 are using 2010 World Bank figures to analyze the economic status of people in 1978. So there were not 800 million people living in poverty in 1978. There were 130 million. A lot of people were living on subsistence, but they had homes and food and fuel to cook their food and clothes and so forth. So the way that Professor Dunford, Dr. Dunford looks at it is that, there in fact were about 130 million people. Is there abject poverty as defined by the World Bank in 2020 figures in 2020? No. So China did in fact raise people out of poverty, everyone out of poverty. Not everyone. They're incredibly marginal, 0.0001 kind of percents of the population who do live in poverty. In fact, I know one homeless guy. In where I live in Beijing, in the district I live in Beijing, I know where the homeless guy is. He lives about 4 blocks that way, and he plays the erhu and collects money in a can. But he's the only homeless guy that lives in this entire district that I've seen, and I travel a lot around my own district and, of course, around China as well. So there is very little, almost none, statistically zero, in terms of outliers, abject poverty in China. In terms of the GDP growth figure, going back to that, the Common Prosperity Campaign, which followed the Poverty Alleviation Campaign, which succeeded in 2020, it's one of its goals. It has many different metrics, but the most important metric is explained to me by economist John Ross. From 2020 to 2035, China wants to double its GDP. So that means it needs 4.7 average GDP growth from 2020 to 2035 to achieve doubling its nominal GDP, the GDP that people like to use because it puts the US at number one, not the PPP measurement, which puts China at number one in terms of the size of its economy. So that means there will be more money and more cash flush areas of China. And so this is just one of the ways that China measures how people are becoming more prosperous. But if you look at the GDP from 2020 to 2025 and, moving into 2026, you do see that China is on track to achieve this goal. But you also see, like economists in the West like to point out, that the total GDP figure is lowering. But if you actually look at the number, the total amount of extra money that's being added to the Chinese economy, it's not lowering. It's not slowing. So while the actual figure is reducing in terms of the percentage of the economy being added, the total amount of money being added to the economy is either the same or growing every year. We're adding more than $1 trillion to the Chinese economy every year. So in a sense, China's economy is not slowing. What we have is something called graduation towards the mean, or graduating towards the mean, where the statistical representation of the total size of China's economic growth appears to be lowering. The total growth each year of China's economy is the same. So is China's economy slowing? No, it's actually not slowing. That's just one particular way to analyze the data when we look at the way that math represents the figures. Will China's economy eventually slow? Probably sometime around 2045 or 2050. It may hit like a ceiling of some kind. I don't know. But right now, no, China's economy is flying. And if you're standing in China looking around every year, and you've been here for the last at least 10 years, it is obvious on the ground. One thing that I do, and I'm only one of 2 or 3 people I know that actually do this regularly, I go to the poorest areas of China all the time. I have been to at least 2 or 3 dozen villages in China, which at one point were some of the poorest villages in all of China. And now a lot of them are incredibly prosperous because there are a lot of tools in China's poverty alleviation toolkit. And I mean, when I say a lot of, I mean thousands of different methodologies. I'm mostly looking at tourism. How can a village which becomes a tourist site, which is set up by investments from local governments and oftentimes SOEs as well, suddenly become prosperous? There's a village, let me give you one example. It's called Taiheng Shuizhen. It's in Hebei province. It used to be one of the poorest places in all of China. Abject poverty. Real extreme poverty in quotes as afforded by the World Bank. And now it's prosperous. People own their own shops. There's dumpling stores and there's souvenir shops and there's a little theater and they have different restaurants and ice cream for the kids. How did they do that? Well, if you look at Hebei, where it's situated, and you can do this with most any place in China, surrounding this area are major cities. Like Beijing has 22 million people, or 21.5. Tianjin has, also a gigantic population. You have Shijiazhuang has 11 million people, and all of these other cities in Hebei and Beijing who just have massive populations. Well, all the government needs to do is advertise this town, set up a shopping street, and then give people shops for free in many cases, and invest into the area, provide horse riding and all kinds of other activities for the kiddies and the families. And suddenly people are rushing from these major cities to these little villages that used to be impoverished. And those villagers are now prosperous. Is this true of everywhere in China? No. There are still rural villages that need help, but will they get it? Based on the trajectory of rural development that I see, yes. And I think we're going to be looking at an end of one phase of the Common Prosperity Campaign by 2035. There are also goals for 2045 and 2049 because China's government plans. The first white paper that gets released every single year in China in January, the first one every single year, is about the poorest places in China and what the Chinese government is doing to help them. This is the number one priority of the government of China, and we're going to see improvements in the common well-being of people across China for years and decades to come.
It's a great description of why China is doing well. Do you capture any of that in your book as well? Or
My last book wasn't about what's happening inside of China. The World Beyond Poverty focuses on how China is cooperating with its partners in developing countries to help reshape those economies. Because if you look at the last 4 centuries with the West in the lead, you can see that Europe developed and the United States developed in a couple of other small areas, and everywhere else didn't just not develop. They underdeveloped. They de-developed. India became poorer. The Middle East became poor. Africa became poor. So you see colonialism and imperialism leading to the development of one area and the underdevelopment of other areas. This is modernity. When you go to Sudan, that's modernity. That's what modernity looks like, because modernity under European and American imperialism is the extraction of wealth from one place and the increase of wealth in another place. What China is doing, and my book points this out, is actually providing the requisite infrastructure. And actually, I get this from a book by Jeffrey Sachs. He has 6 things that developing countries need in order to start developing. And those are things like health and education and infrastructure. And what China is actually providing for the poorest countries in the world are free bridges, ports on loan, free hospitals and hospitals on loan, and free schools. There are more than 100 free schools in Africa that China built, more than 100 free hospitals in Africa that China built. And China's not just doing this in Africa, it's also doing this in places all around the world: Southeast Asia, Central Asia, the Middle East. There are right now 1,000 schools being built in Iraq. This is for oil. But they're actually part of a larger phase where the other phases will eventually provide 7,000 schools in the country of Iraq based on oil exports. So China is helping these countries around the world develop, and we're moving to a phase past modernism. I'm not going to call it postmodernism because that means something else, but we're moving past the idea of European imperialism and Euro-American imperialism into a new phase of global multipolarity, where China isn't just extracting wealth like the Europeans did. It's creating the conditions for economic growth where the conditions did not previously exist for developing countries, the least developed countries around the world.
yeah, there's a saying that America builds military base. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, you asked me about my book. I am now working on a new book, and that focuses on alleviating poverty in China. Go on. I'm sorry.
Okay. That will be an interesting book. I've ordered your other book, World Beyond Poverty, so I'm waiting for that to come here, and I can read it.
Thank
I'm
you,
sure
sir.
it will be interesting. but there's a saying that America builds military bases, whereas China builds infrastructure in different
Mhm.
countries, and
Mm.
that's a stark reality. And that's how both countries have progressed, I guess. One sort of extract resources, and one sort of tries to work with other countries and grow through trade. I think China, in its history, hasn't really invaded any other country except Vietnam for a brief period of time. It's got a
1979, for
history.
1 month, the United
Yeah,
States, sorry,
yeah,
China
yeah,
engaged in war with Vietnam to prevent it
yeah,
from invading Cambodia. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But it's got a, I mean, to my knowledge, a 5,000-year-old civilization hasn't invaded any other country. It has always grown through trade. Whereas if you look at Britain, America, and some other European countries, they've grown through wars and fighting, not just fighting in Asia, fighting among themselves as well. So I think there's
Mm.
a clash of civilizations, of mentality as well. I mean, the data is out there. I mean, you've beautifully pointed out all these data points and information. I wonder, why do Western economists get this wrong so often about China? I mean,
Mm.
Peter Zihan, David Chong, most of the predictions are wrong anyway, but
I
they are
wouldn't
very
consider
confident with their
Peter
predictions.
Zehan. He's not an
Yeah.
intellectual. He's just someone getting as many clicks as he can.
Yeah, I know he gets a lot of clicks as well. But yeah, but he's wrong about almost everything when it
Mm.
comes to China. I mean, 1 out of 10 predictions coming true. I mean, it's normal. I guess anybody can do that. I guess, but yeah,
Mm.
I've always wondered: is it that Western economists view Chinese economy through their own lens, and they don't understand how China is progressing? Because as you explained at the start of the video, I mean, there's a society-based utilities infrastructure, and on top of that, the capitalist market is based. I mean, surely people would have that information, but again, Western economists, the doom sayers, I don't think they view China through Chinese economists' point of view. They view China through their own point of view. Uh,
Mhm.
I found Ku Jin, his book, The New China Playbook.
Mhm.
It's a very informative book.
I
That's
have a
probably
book
one
right
of the
there.
best
Yeah.
books. Oh yeah, it's probably
Yeah.
one of the only books that I've read so far that gave me a glimpse of how Chinese economy actually works. I've talked to Chinese people over here, but in terms of a proper academic research sort of work, that's probably the best book out there, and that tells
Mm.
you how China is progressing step by step, and they
Mm.
don't intend to slow down, like you've mentioned. So their economy is 28 trillion. Even 4 or 5% of 28 trillion is 1.4 trillion every year. So again, you're right. They're adding trillions of dollars every year. It's not that they are slowing down. It's just that when you get to a certain mass, it's difficult to grow at a rapid pace. But even at a certain mass, if you grow 4 or 5%, it still adds trillions of dollars to the economy. And the comparison with India, it's very apt because India has obviously, India is probably the fourth largest economy now, but in terms of GDP per capita or purchasing power parity (PPP), it's gone down significantly. It's even worse than some of the African countries when it comes to GDP per capita or something like that. Um, Surely, I mean, and they had a head start. I guess India had a head start. They had all the industry that Britishers left when they left India. China had to start from scratch, I guess, after a century of humiliation. But China is leaps and bounds beyond anybody else right now, I guess. So, what makes China tick? Is it in their culture, or is it the government, uh, you know, cracking a stick? Okay, we have to do this. We have to do this. We have to do this.
Well, I mean, I think it really goes back to what we were talking about before. China's economy is based on a different set of economic principles. You mentioned Kayujin. There are other economists that can explain this. Ben Norton, he's a U.S. citizen who now has citizenship of another country but lives in Beijing, and he's studying at Tsinghua University. You can also find Yan Liang, Dr. Liang. She studies at Willamette University. Or Mitch Presnick is a research fellow at Harvard University, or Kyle Chan at Princeton University, or Dr. Huega at Cambridge University. All of these people are related to the field of economics, or of course, Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, who is an absolute genius as well. All of these people actually do understand how China's economy works, and they can see why it functions the way that it does. Now, China's economy, like we talked about before, it has affordable inputs, and I think that this method is really what it is. You know, in the West, we're talking about why do Western economists misunderstand China. It's because there is a belief structure at play. It's not an intellectual structure, you know, where they just use the numbers. People in the United States, they believe that a liberal economy produces the best results. They believe in the power of the invisible hand. And so that they are actually kind of almost worship at this altar of liberalism, of the liberalism of the economy. I don't mean cultural liberalism. I mean economic liberalism, which means the privatization of every part of society that can be privatized up into the point where there's another collapse of the economy. And then in come the regulators again to save the economy from itself. And then the process repeats. What we really have in the United States is a failure of intellectuals to challenge their own ideas because they have entrenched ideas about how economics should operate. And so if you look at China, China is not, you know, China is actually, I think this is Deng Xiaoping, a cat by any other color catches a mouse. So this actually really means that we want the system that works. So one thing that China does is when they're like, okay, we're going to take on a new policy, you know, it's going to be part of our next 5-year plan or 10-year plan. They will invite experts from all over the world who know about this topic to Beijing and elsewhere. And they will sit down with them and they will ask them meaningful questions, not ideological questions. And they will try to understand this from many, many different economists and politicians and other leaders, agricultural experts, scientists, engineers. And they will get to the point where they understand what works. And then they will use that within the umbrella framework of their economic model to find a solution that actually is going to move the country forward. So I think what we have are multiple things going on at the same time. One, China has integrated the market economy with a socialist economy, and it works because that is what works. They developed a system that actually functions. Market economy based on socialist utility inputs, based on all these very successful SOEs. Another thing we don't see is Gordon G. Chang, not Gordon H. Chang, different guy. Gordon G. Chang keeps saying China's economy is going to collapse. And you would expect that he'd be right eventually, right? Because from the Western point of view, boom, bust, boom, bust. We know that eventually some kind of collapse is inevitable. However, China doesn't have a collapsing model. It just keeps going up and up and up and up and up for decades, unlike anything the West has ever seen. Why is that? Part of the reason is SOEs provide stability. So, like, you have tens of millions of people who are employed by SOEs, and their jobs aren't going anywhere. No matter what happens to one micro part of the economy, like real estate, the rest of the economy will just keep moving, and real estate will just eventually catch up and be right sized within that economic model. So I think what we need to see in the West is a reevaluation of what works, not ideology. Let's put all what we think about socialism, what we think about Marxism, what we think about liberalism. The West needs to put all these biases aside and think about what works, and then that would work for them as well. And so the Chinese government is able to do that because they are, a lot of them, technologists, engineers. A lot of the people who are in the central parts of Chinese government at various levels and various tiers are engineers or people who come from STEM fields or even rare earth minerals and so forth. And these people are elected by people who are elected by people. China has a form of democracy. We don't have to go into that unless you want to, but the people who are in charge should be there and are actually making the right decisions for China's economy. Whereas, for example, in the United States, we elect based on a popularity contest, and then we just get these people who have really no place running a government. I mean, the United States is run by lawyers and China is run by scientists and engineers. That says a lot about why China is able to be successful and choose what works instead of an ideology.
No, that's true. China is run by engineers. and scientists. That's how you can see all the progress in infrastructure and technology. I'm just amazed at the bridges and the buildings China is building. Not just building it at a faster pace. I mean, that's
Mm.
unheard of. During COVID, I heard that they built hospitals within months. I mean, that
Weeks.
would never, yeah, weeks. That would never happen in Australia or any Western country because you have to go through all the bureaucratic hoops. You have to get approvals for
Mm.
one,
Mm.
two, three, four, five, six, seven things, and then you have an architecture firm and then structural engineering firm who would design it. It would take years and years to build that kind of infrastructure. Yeah, so that's amazing. So your book, World Beyond Poverty, what motivated you to write that book? How did
Well,
that
there's
come
several.
about?
You know what? Well, firstly, it was curiosity. Like there were these narratives in the West that China was debt trapping people. When I studied my master's degree again, I studied modern world history. I actually took a 3-year master's, even though I could have done it in 1 year because I'm a nerd and I just stayed at university taking way more classes than I needed. And I was attending multiple universities at the same time at one point during that. And I studied post-colonialism, imperialism, that kind of thing. Because from 1500 to the present, what is that? I mean, that's mostly Europe and the United States going around the world,
Yeah.
stealing everyone's gold at the point of a bayonet. So I really wanted to understand, oh, wait, is China doing that? What is China actually doing? How is the world developing? Can it develop differently? So I started looking at individual cases from an academic point of view. I like to be a normal person. I don't I don't actually care to be an intellectual because I think intellectuals are just talking to each other and oftentimes talking to the wall. I want to communicate in a way that I grew up in a hardworking family of construction workers. My family come from, building houses and sweating and bleeding in the sun and, coming home with burned skin and going to the lake and drinking beer. Like, so I grew up with regular people, regular Joe America 6-pack people. That's my entire family. I have 3 brothers. They all do construction. My father does construction. My uncle did construction. And these people were like car mechanics and building houses and just doing absolutely rigorous physical labor. They talk like normal people. So I always wanted to talk like normal people. But then when I was in my master's degree and when I eventually moved to China, I started studying what China was doing. I wanted to translate what I was studying, what I was learning about China to normal people. So I went to all of these intellectual websites, Johns Hopkins University, the College of William and Mary, which have done extensive studies on China's Belt and Road Initiative and how China engages with the developing world. And then what I sought to do was translate this inaccessible data, these really difficult to understand ideas about how China was building hospitals in these other countries and what China was actually doing, how it was not imperialism, how it was not colonialism, how it was not a debt trap. And I wanted to translate these hard to understand ideas with the help of interviewing dozens of guests that have had the opportunity to ask about this, who studied this specifically, and put that in a language where a normal person could read it and understand what the heck I was talking about. Now, some language can't be avoided. You have to talk about what a BOT is and explain what a BOT is. However, I tried to do it in a way that if I was 18 years old and I didn't have a college education, if I opened this book and really wanted to understand what was in it, I would be able to understand it. I think a lot of economists are talking to each other. A lot of, PhDs are talking to each other. And I'm trying to take what they've written about this and make it accessible.
That's actually a great. I think that's actually a great approach to boil it down in simple language and try to tell simple folks how Chinese economy is progressing. Because most of the economists, I mean, I have great respect for everybody. It's Professor Jeffrey Sachs as well. Joseph Stigler also comes to mind. Uh, but again, they write as if they've written books as well, but they write books as if they're writing academic paper. So you have to have that at the back of your mind that you're not just reading a simple book, you're reading uh, the academic work of someone who's just transferred something from the paper, research paper, to the books. So yeah, so that's actually a great approach. Try to boil it down in simple language. How has the reception been so far for your book? Have you
The people who've read,
seen? Yeah, yeah.
well, the
Sorry,
people
go
who've
on.
read,
Yeah.
sorry, the people who've read it thus far, liked it a lot. I'm actually going to be running. Actually, right now, I'm sitting in Beijing, and just before this interview, I received a phone call that my 50 more of my books have arrived, having been shipped from the United States. They're downstairs. I'm going to go get them as soon as this interview is over, and I'll be sending those out to other influencers and people in China that I respect and trust. But I've already done that. I had one round of 17 of them, and I sent them to a lot of big influencers. They loved them. I had endorsements from Andy Borham. I had endorsements from Oricron or Alvarez, who's a Marxist online. I had endorsements from Jerry Good. I've had endorsements from other people. Mitch Presnick at Harvard University liked it. I've sent it to some people in the United States and other places as well. I'm about to send it to about, I don't know, 40 more people because I realized I need to keep some for myself because you never know. I'm going to go to an event. I might just want to bring one to give to whoever invited me. I'm going to be running a campaign. So if you guys are following me on X, you can, I will be advertising when this campaign is going to run. For one weekend coming up in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to give the ebook version of my book from Amazon.com away for free. So there will be a 48-hour period where anyone who wants to have the ebook version of my book, you will be able to download it for free. I will be posting about that on my X and some other places, and so that people who are interested and they just want to read it and they can't afford it, or maybe you don't live in a country that Amazon delivers to, right? Because Amazon's not available everywhere, and you do want to have access to this book. You live in Nigeria, great. You'll be able to download my book for free for these 48 hours. After that, it's going to go back to its regular price. The ebook version is $3.99. Paperback is $19.89. The hardback is too expensive. But it's been people who have read it have enjoyed it enormously, and I've sold several hundred copies already.
No, that's a great offer. I like reading physical books, so I'll order it via Amazon. The problem is not all books are available in Australia, so you have to wait for a few weeks for them to be shipped from America or from whichever country they are published, I guess. So that's the only downside of living in Australia, far from everything, I guess. So you talked about China being a democracy. Can you briefly talk about it a bit more? How is it a democracy?
This is like a civics class. The question you're asking me, when I learned about how the United States democracy works, that was a year in high school. So it's not, I will try to summarize it in a few minutes, but remember that whatever I've said, it's caveated with it's much more complicated than I'm boiling it down to. Okay, having said that, every year there is a parliamentary session where there's a meeting of the CPPCC and the NPC. And these are the two parliamentary bodies, because it's a bicameral, just like a lot of other countries. It just works differently. And these meet in Beijing for a couple of days. This is the meeting of these two bodies. It would be like the Senate and the House of Representatives meeting in the United States. So these two bodies meet in the summer every year for 2 days. The NPC, the National People's Congress, is about 2,000 to 3,000 people. I don't know the exact number, and it does fluctuate by about a dozen people, depending. Now, these are chosen from elected people, because there are local elections at village levels, small levels. Even here in Beijing, my local community has some kind of election for some figure periodically. And this is a small level. So it's like a pyramid where there are local elections on a small level, and then there are elections above that based on people who are already elected to one of the many parties, because China is not a one-party system. Just one party is massively larger than the other parties, actually. But the NPC is comprised of people from all walks of life. So it's not lawyers, and it's not just engineers, like people also presuppose. There are street sweepers, there are factory workers, there are doctors, there are professors, there are actors, there are people who work at the grocery store. And a lot of these people are put there because they wrote in something else. There's another part of this called consultative democracy. They wrote in, they had ideas, they wanted to be part of this system. And because they wanted to change society in some meaningful way. And that's what the NPC is. And the NPC is the highest law-making body in China. So people always think, oh, Xi Jinping runs everything. That is a gross misunderstanding of how China's political system works. Anyone who says that has just officially declared, I know nothing about China. So you can automatically assume that anyone who just thinks that Xi runs everything, President Xi Jinping runs everything, simply does not understand China's political system. It's a dead giveaway. And even professors at high-ranking universities in the United States make this ridiculous assertion. And it just shows ignorance. But so the NPC is the highest lawmaking body. The CPPCC is a 5-year body. So people who are members of the CPPCC are members for 5 years. And again, they are from all walks of life. They represent, just like the NPC, every ethnic group in China. So there are 56 ethnic groups, 55 minorities. Every single ethnic group has many representatives. It's not like we have a Uyghur guy. No, there's like a couple dozen Uyghurs. There's a couple dozen Miao. There's a couple dozen of everybody. So everyone's represented, and they're represented in a kind of relationship to the population. Whatever percentage of the population each minority is, gets a larger segment of representation in these bodies, especially the CPPCC. Now, they're also from every background. They're, again, street sweepers and cleaners and doctors and lawyers and engineers and scientists and professors and just everybody. Everybody's there, school teachers and principals and whatever, tailors. They're all in there because they want to change something, and they had an idea. They were part of the consultative process, and they are now part of this bicameral parliamentary system that meets and is called 2 sessions. So if you're going to take anything away from this, because there's a lot of information, just remember there's something called 2 sessions. CPPCC is a lot to remember. I remember struggling with that when I first heard it. I was like, what? CCCCP what? It was so like, you have to, if you're going to take away any word that, because this is a lot of information, just remember 2 sessions. So these 2 bodies meet, and the CPPCC is a consultative body that tells the NPC, the highest lawmaking body, I guess it would be like the Senate, all the ideas they want to see change in China. And they have these long sessions where different groups are meeting in different configurations for those days. And then finally, the NPC will, take extensive notes. And even if they reject an idea, the NPC has to write a paper about which idea they preferred, a white paper that actually says why they chose this idea over that idea. And then the NPC will spend the next year, at least, trying to implement the best ideas from this conference and from the CPPCC. So then they create new laws based on what the needs of the people are expressed from all walks of life, from all ethnic groups, from all regions of China. And then this is how the laws are largely made. And this is actually where most of the laws in China come from. And then you have other organizations that have degrees of power, different ministries like MOFCOM and so forth. They have the ability to affect their particular field or implement their particular ideas in certain ways where their field overlaps with other fields or in consultation with other ministries. And so it's actually very, very complex. Again, this would take a year of classes, attending a university or a high school to take a civics class to understand all of it. But it is a form of democracy. In fact, I'm going to have a guest named Pavel Vargan, who is an advocate for democracy in Europe and also a Marxist. And he's coming on my show next month on the Bridge to China to talk about this process. Some people who know about it are Pavel. There's a guy, Joseph Mahoney, a doctor at East China Normal University, who is in the U.S. He's a U.S. citizen, but teaching in China, who understands China's political system. If you want to learn more, you can read Dr. Joseph Mahoney's articles. David Ferguson, who you can find on X and elsewhere, he works for Foreign Language Press. He's also an expert on China's political system. He's from Scotland. So if you're looking for someone from the West who can put these ideas into the way that we understand things, and then follow them up on their how the China's political system actually works. Pavel Vargan, I think he's Polish. I'm not actually sure. Then David Ferguson, Dr. Joseph Mahoney, myself, Ben Norton. These people are from the West, and we can articulate how China's political system works. I'd recommend you follow all, or at least one or two of us if you're curious about learning more.
That's great advice. I guess it's definitely beneficial to listen to different perspectives. I've always struggled to find Chinese economists. mainly because there are none in Australia, I guess. We see students when I was.
Dr. Warwick Powell.
Yeah,
Dr. Warwick Powell. He teaches at Queensland University. He's an adjunct professor.
yeah,
He is based out of Australia. He's a genius, and he understands China intimately.
yeah. He's. I'm talking to him probably next week, so I've already
Great.
reached out to him. He very graciously said yes. So yeah, so I'll be talking to him hopefully next week, depending on his availability. But yeah. So I'm hoping that will be another beneficial conversation, because I'm learning so much talking to you, talking to a couple of other people that I've talked to before, and Dr. Warwick Powell, reading K. Eugene's book. That was very informative as well. So you had all these different guests. Were there any one or two guests that you found most interesting, I guess?
Wow. That's a tough one.
Without
I was
naming, without naming them, I guess.
well, I like to name them actually. Ben Norton. Firstly, he's not a normal human being. Sorry, Ben, if you're watching, you are not normal. You're not like the rest of us. You're weird. You know why? He is too smart. He seems to know everything. He's like a sponge for information. He knows everything about everything. Even if you want to know about China, despite the fact that he studies the entire world, his understanding of China's political and economic system is insanely good. If you're also looking for a Chinese-based person, because that's a really good question, representation, right?
Yeah.
Edward Said. If you really want to understand from a Chinese point of view, Dr. Tang Xiaoyang at Tsinghua University, who studied at Johns Hopkins University and is now the chair for the International Relations Department and an economist here in China. He is a genius on China's economy, and he's authentically Chinese, a Chinese voice, born and raised in China, who studied in China and the West and traveled to more than 30 countries in Africa. He knows China's economy incredibly well. So if you want to follow Dr. Tang Xiaoyang or interview him, I encourage you to do so. You can't get better information on China than these kinds of people.
I'll definitely reach out to these people. Hopefully, they will say yes. So, corruption is a big thing in China. I mean, but I know that the government is trying to clamp down on corruption. Do you think are they being successful at a rate that they want to be successful, or is the problem growing?
When
Do you
you
have
look at
any?
the
Yeah,
I
yeah,
have a lot to say about this. When you look at the data points from Western organizations, it's usually organizations who have members who are incredibly biased against China. Is there corruption in China? Oh yeah, sure. Is there corruption in every country in the world? Oh yeah, sure. But I like to compare to my own home country, the United States. In the United States, corruption is legal. We have lobbying. So corporations and individuals, especially the rich and powerful, because if you're working in a cafe or a gas station or on a farm, you don't have time to go to Washington, D.C. You don't have
yeah.
days off to go to Washington, D.C. and lobby a politician. Your voice is not heard by that politician. So, you have all these huge private interests and corporate interests who go to our government, buy them fancy things, pay for fancy lunches. And, we all know that there's money too. Plus campaign donations basically decide who's going to be the next president of the United States. So is there corruption in China? Yeah. Is there corruption in the United States? I would say much more. But the problem is for the United States, and the reason a lot of these studies don't show the United States as being corrupt, is corruption is actually there by law. It's legal to have political corruption in the United States. Who pays for people to be elected? The richest, the most powerful, and corporations. They tell you who your candidates are. Do you want candidate A, who is accepting our donations, or do you want candidate B, who's also accepting our donations? You know who Raytheon gives money to? Everyone. So this military industrial organization that makes weapons actually decides who's going to be elected, and they fund both sides. So no matter who gets elected, they have a say in how that elected official is going to end up playing out. Because, hey, if you don't give us a contract or go to war with X place, we're not going to give you money next time. And so a lot of US politicians are controlled by private corporations, controlled by military organizations that provide weapons that continue to grow the US empire. I mean, there's enormous corruption in the United States. Is there corruption in China? Yes, of course there is. Is there less corruption in China today than there was 10 years ago? Far less. I remember coming here in 2012, and there was a joke about mooncakes, because every year there's something called the Moon Festival. And they used to literally pack cash. This is how the story goes: cash underneath a box of mooncakes that was given to certain political officials in China. Oh my gosh, those people would actually be executed or put in jail today. China actually takes a lot of political officials who have been caught taking bribes, and then they give them a suspended execution period of 2 years. What this means is they've actually sentenced them to death, and then they go to jail, and then they are given a reprieve, and then they just spend life imprisonment. So there's an enormous crackdown on corruption in China, and every person who is corrupt is caught. They call it the Tigers and Flies campaign under President Xi Jinping, where big corrupt officials who are called tigers and small corrupt officials who are called flies are caught out by the system everywhere that they can be. And people are encouraged to turn these officials in if they are caught bribe. You can, in China, I could pick up the phone right now. I can dial 12345 and say, I know that there's a political official in China who is corrupt, and I would like to, I have evidence of it, and you can turn them in, and that person will be punished either by being kicked out of the party or their party or the government, or in some other way, or if it's a very serious issue, maybe even they were going to serve jail time. So corruption is taken extremely seriously in China, and there's far less corruption than there used to be. Whereas in the United States, corruption seems to be growing. I mean, look at the amount of money that U.S. politicians are making by being in the Senate, having inside information, and then trading on that information. It's disgusting. So yeah, there's corruption in China, but I don't think it's nearly as serious as the corruption in my own country.
Yeah, the insider trading thing, it's legal in America somehow. I don't really understand that. It's a
Well,
clear
they make the
conflict of
laws.
interest thing.
Yeah.
It's a clear conflict of interest thing. They pass the laws and they know what's going to happen to different companies that buy stocks and or options, stuff like that. But you hear stories of politicians and officials getting caught in China because of corruption. You seldom hear stories coming out of America that politicians and officials have been caught of being corrupt. So you sort of wonder, does anyone in America get caught at all doing corruption or no? Yeah.
Well,
So they,
one of the what is it called? The Supreme Court justices was caught, but guess what?
yeah,
He's a Supreme Court justice. So
yeah,
the public was outraged, but he's still there.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, in a way, you're right. Corruption is legal in America, but I guess uh, America going through military bases and military expansion, at some point, it's going to run out of resources. I mean, surely people would realize that enough is enough. I mean, it's got like bases in 150 countries, something like that, 700 military bases, including small roadside bases as well. So, I mean, how do you support all that? Where does the money come from? I know they can print money, but again,
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't that money be better used to build own society infrastructure, helping people? I never
Wow.
understood that mentality though. Yeah. Yeah, American mentality.
You
Yeah.
you are speaking my game. I feel the same way. As an American citizen, I want what's best for the American people. I don't want what's best for Raytheon and Boeing and all of these military contractors, or the Pentagon, the corruption that goes on in the Pentagon when they can't account for $1 trillion here and there. I think it's ridiculous. As an American citizen, I want schools, I want roads, I want America
Yeah.
to invest in itself. I want us to develop our factories. I want us to develop our industry. I want to develop high speed rail. I want to make life better for the American people. I do not want or care if we are occupying South Korea. And I honestly think that that's South Korea's issue. They need to handle their own stuff or whatever. We don't need to pay for bases in Germany. Germany should be paying for its own defense. The United States needs to bring most. I think we do need bases. Actually, there's piracy and stuff. I think we should keep 10 or 50 bases, the critical ones around the world that we can provide a defense and keep global stability. But I think overreach is not just double or triple or quadruple, but like we have 10 times more bases than we need plus. So let's shut most of those down, allow countries sovereign autonomy to run their own affairs, and bring our children home and rebuild our republic. And also, like China, let's help some of the other nations build as well. When people talk about foreign aid in the United States, they think, oh, the United States gives so much in foreign aid. And that's the discourse over the last year and a half. However, most of the foreign aid we give is actually military aid. So we give money to Pakistan, but only if they spend it
Correct.
on weapons from the United States. We
Correct.
give money to Israel, but only if they spend it on weapons from the United States. We're not building schools. We're not building
Yeah.
hospitals. China's doing that. Well, if we were actually giving the amount of aid that we call aid as is schools and bridges and hospitals, the entire world would have already developed and there'd be no poverty anywhere in the world already. So we need to stop wasting money on endless wars and endless empire and invest in the republic and helping, diplomacy. How, on African currency, there are bridges and dams and hydropower facilities that China built. Imagine if that was the United States. That's the best form of diplomacy. Do you want peace with countries in Africa for the next century? Build them a school, build them a hospital, call it the America Sudan Hospital. Wow, are people going to remember the United States in a positive way? Are they going to try to invade the United States? Of course not. They're going to love the United States. We need to switch our thinking completely and start giving actual aid as diplomacy to other countries, rebuild ourselves, and shut the empire down. This is better for the United States, the people of the United States, and it's better for the world and the people of the world. Just as you said, I'm just reframing. I feel very passionate about this issue.
No, I can feel the passion. I can feel the passion. But I read and hear about policy papers coming out of Washington almost every month. We need to tackle this threat. We need to tackle China threat. We need to tackle some other threat in Middle East, stuff like that. And then I hear JD Vance say that Greenland will be better off becoming part of America. Greenland has better infrastructure, free schools, healthcare is better, purchasing power parity is far more than American purchasing power parity. America doesn't have proper infrastructure. How is Greenland going to be better becoming part of America? And also, $1 trillion. I mean, as an engineer, if I do a quick math, it can build around 1 to 2 million homes for Americans, complete with ancillary infrastructure, roads, suburbs, schools, water, sewage. So that money could be better spent on America's own people, I guess, rather than maybe because there's more profit margin in building weapons than because infrastructure only gives you 10 to 15% net profit. So I'm not sure what the profit margin is in the weapons industry. Maybe that's why most of the money goes to weapons industry in America. But it's not just that America is spending money on its own military industrial complex. It's trying to tell, for example, Australia is trying to tell Australia that we have to increase our own military budget as well. And we have to accommodate whatever America says in terms of military expansion around Australia. So that bothers me as well. But yeah, I mean, you can't really do much when you have an empire like America. I hope some of them come to their senses, I guess. Their strength going through trade, their sense in growing through trade like China is doing. When you talk to people from Africa, you hear that China is building, like you mentioned, roads and schools and stuff like that. And they say that Americans come and give us lectures. China comes and gives us money and builds infrastructure so they can trade as well and connect different cities. There's a stark difference in the thinking and the mentality as well. I'm not sure when that thinking will prevail in America, but looking at the current American leadership, not just the president, but Senate and Congress, doesn't really bode well, I guess, for America. But I guess they're still a power. They will remain a power. They've got a lot of money. One good thing about America is their technological advancement. So they've got Google, Apple, Silicon Valley. And on the other end, you have China developing its own DeepSeek, their own version of Google, Facebook, all that kind of stuff, Huawei phone. You don't see any other country. You don't see Europe developing any technology. You don't see India developing any other technology. Maybe Russia to some extent. So they are two extreme, powers developing their own technology. So probably at the end, the world's going to be divided. Some people will side with America because of their dependence on American technology. Some people might side with China because of their own dependence on Chinese technology. That's how I see probably the world will come to in future, a multipolar world. What's your take on the current trade war, though? It's not going well for anybody, I guess.
Well, like I mentioned earlier, China's already replaced exports to the United States with exports to developing countries, especially the least developing countries who have actually zero tariff exports to China now. The last FOCAC,
Hmm.
Foreign on China Africa cooperation in Beijing, China lowered tariffs to zero for almost every country in Africa, except one or two, I think, and almost all of the least developed countries in the world. So even Nepal, for example, can export its
Yeah.
goods to China with zero tariffs, which gives them a strategic advantage over other exporters, especially agricultural exporters to China. And that is going to be a boom for their economy. And hopefully that's going to mean more wealth developing in those countries and more favorable um, a forex will develop in a lot of those economies as well. In terms of the United States and China, I heard your assessment earlier. I think you're partially right. I think there is another angle. You know, at one point, China really wanted semiconductors from the United States, and it was very important that China get semiconductors. But there were a lot of aspects of that play that the United States tried that just didn't actually make sense. The really tiny, super fine, most advanced microchips are not particularly useful in 99% of industry. Even on a missile, you want a big semiconductor. You don't want something shaking around in there. Or if you're building a laptop like the one that I'm using to talk to you, you don't need that. That's only really good in the most super powerful computers that are used for AI and that. And China's already replaced those by stacking other kinds of microchips. They have the same output. In fact, some of the fastest supercomputers in the world are still Chinese, despite the semiconductor ban on China.
Yeah.
Plus, the United States spurred domestic growth, and a lot of microprocessors that are made today, some of the best ones are now made in China. Has China fully caught up in semiconductors? No. The West, the United States and its semiconductor allies, if we want to call them that, are still ahead. But China will not be behind for more than a couple of more years. And then China doesn't actually need semiconductors from the United States or its partners. Who consumes the most semiconductors in the world? China. 90% of all semiconductors exported in the world went to China, go to China. Why? Because China makes gadgets, phones, watches, Huawei phones, Apple phones, even Samsung products are processed in China at some point in the supply chain. So radios, TVs, vacuums. I have a robot mop that mops the house. Everything that you people buy, coffee machines, it's manufactured in China mostly. Of course, there are places products coming out of South Korea and ASEAN as well, but a lot of those have at least some part of their supply chain in China. Now, so the United States had a great product, and its semiconductor allies had a product, and now that product is meaningless. The market for those products is gone. So actually, they've destroyed their own industry to some extent. We're going to see that play out over the next few years, where those companies are looking for new markets. But China, rare earth elements, rare earth minerals. Who produces those? China produces the lion's share in the world. Now, it's not about having rare earths. A lot of people misunderstand this, especially people in America. They're like, oh, we have rare earths. You know, we can get rare earths from here and there in Argentina and whatever. Okay, yeah, here's some dirt. Is that can you put that dirt in your phone? No, it's not about where earth minerals come from. It's not about mining them. Of course, you can get them in the United States or Argentina or Ukraine or wherever else. You can. Now, here's a pile of dirt. Good luck. What China has is a 40-year lead on processing those technologies. There's 100 steps sometimes in taking rare earth and then processing it one way through a chemical process, waiting, processing it another, what the output of that through another process, waiting, doing it again 100 steps to get to the final product where you finally have one of these rare earth elements. So for the United, and also there are 36 different majors and 50 different majors, the 36 different majors for rare earth element processing at Chinese universities, and there are 50 different for battery, lithium ion battery technology in China. So if you want to work in batteries, you want to work, China has all of the technology, all of the engineers, all of the scientists, all of the infrastructure, all of the logistics hubs that are put next to each other. It has all of the infrastructure. A lot of people in the United States are like, ha ha ha, we can rebuild that industry in 5 years. Really? I'm interested to see that play out because some of the best experts in the United States who actually know what they're talking about, and they're not talking heads, say it will take 30 years for the United States to catch up with China. Guess what they will need next year in the United States when supplies run out? Rare earth elements. We don't have 30 years or even 5 years. You want to make semiconductors in the United States? You're not going to be able to. The United States won't be able to make anything meaningful next year this time. So, respectfully, I think China has some cards the United States does not have. And I'm hoping, in the interests of peace and partnership, that Besant can sit down with partners in China. Xi Jinping and Trump can meet up maybe at APEC or somewhere else, and they can sit down and have a rational discussion of how these two countries can have a meaningful partnership and lower the tension, lower the tariff war, and we can actually work together for the betterment of both our countries and the rest of the world. Because it's like you said, it's not in anyone's interest for this China does not need to export to the United States, but China would want to. China wants the US market. Absolutely. It's going to help China's economy grow. Does the United States need China? Actually, I think it does. And that's kind of a problem for the United States right now. And I think that's why we see Besant freaking out with 500% tariffs. The reason he's raising from 130% to 500 is they don't have any cards left to play. The United States is like, well, what do you do? No idea. Let's just raise it to a billion percent tariff, because 500% is just as meaningless. As an American citizen, I'm really worried about what's going to happen to our people when our government screws this up. What we need are more competent leaders, or the leaders that are in power in Washington, D.C., need to realize, for the love of our own people, that we need to get to the table with China and make a deal.
No, that's true. Especially your bit about the semiconductor industry. I remember Jensen Yang, the CEO of Nvidia, saying that in future their Chinese market will be wiped out because of this trade war, because they were relying. The future revenue was expected to be 50% coming from China in future years. But yeah, because China developing their own internal capacity to produce semiconductor and chips, their revenue source will disappear. So yeah, so that's very true. I think America has shot itself in the foot by having tariffs so high. At 100% trade, 100% tariff trade already stops. So there's no point of going anything beyond 100%. It's meaningless. It's just a number, 400, 500%. I'm not sure what Washington or America are thinking by raising tariffs, but yeah, that's not how you negotiate. I've always seen America being heavy-handed when it comes to these type of trade talks or military talks. I haven't seen anybody doing proper negotiations, I guess. So I'm not sure whether America is capable of negotiating in good faith uh, based on its past history. But yeah, it will be interesting to see where America and China stand next year. So far, China's done pretty well. But it's the countries between China and America that suffer the most. That's the thing, when two
Mm.
elephants collide, it's mostly the grass and other bugs that get destroyed. So that's the problem that the rest of the world has. So no, thanks very much, Jason. I really enjoyed talking to you. You've given some really good points, and the beautiful articulation of how the Chinese economy works. That's possibly the best explanation I've heard how the Chinese economy actually works. So thanks for that. So what do you do in your free time then in China? Do you go back to America on holiday, or just stay
I
in
haven't been
China?
back in a little while. The pandemic came. I talk to my mom on the phone like once a
Right.
week. I call my brothers, and well, of course, there's social media and everything. I don't go back to the United States often. I actually don't travel outside of China, because one of the goals up until about 3 months ago, one of my big goals in life, just for fun, was traveling to every province and territory of China. I did. I just succeeded. Macau was the last place I traveled to before I called it victory, and I'd been to everywhere, and that was very exciting. Right now, I've switched to traveling to poverty alleviation villages, which I've already been traveling to for the last 3 years, but now almost exclusively that's what I do. I go to villages that used to be one of the absolute poorest places in China and now have developed via some mechanism. I talk to people there, I film there, I take photographs there. I'm writing a book right now about that. I haven't named it or anything, but maybe next year that'll come out. For fun, I don't actually have a lot of fun. My fun is my work. I love engaging in social media, videography, all that kind of stuff. Very seldom I will watch a movie, a couple times a week, because I like watching movies. I took up weight training. I have my own bench press and incline decline
That's
and
great.
free weights and stuff. I really like that. So I guess weightlifting and watching movies, and then everything else about me is just pure media from when I wake up to when I go to bed.
So how long did it take you to travel around China? Must have taken a lot of
Well,
time, I guess.
I actually took since I got here in 2012, but
Right.
I really accelerated starting in 2023 when it was really easy to travel again. We had just come out of the pandemic, and I was like, well, you know what? Let's do the rest. And I just started traveling constantly. My wife actually got pretty frustrated with that because some of our vacations were like, okay, we have 10 days and we're going to two provinces. And she'd be like, why do we have to go to two provinces? It's too much.
Yeah.
And so that was frustrating because we didn't sit around the pool relaxing. We were constantly on another plane or another train going to some other city somewhere else.
So is travel easy around China? Is it easier to travel from one place to another? Is the infrastructure there?
Oh my gosh, it's so easy. Well, firstly, we took every kind of mechanism. My wife has a car, which I actually don't really want, but she loves driving. We take high speed rail a lot because it's super convenient. And what's great about high speed rail, and I think this is what Americans don't understand, or people in other countries don't understand, is you have an airport right in your city. Of course, every major city in the world has an airport, but usually, not always, but usually they're on the outside of the city. And so you have to
Yeah.
travel 30 minutes or an hour to
Yeah.
get to that airport. The thing about
Yeah.
high speed rail, for example, in Beijing, there's four or five high speed rail stations, and they're all
Hmm.
inside of the city. So wherever you want to leave from, it's
Hmm.
like 10-minute drive, and then you're there. And the security isn't like an airport where it takes 20, 30 minutes to get through security. You walk in, you put it through a baggage check, like it's a scan for 3 seconds. You're in now. Now you can get on your train. So like the actual wait time to get from into the station and then to get on your train from home is like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. You're done. You're on the train. You arrive in the city of your destination, you're downtown. So like that is way more convenient than the whole airport experience where you just spend half of your day going from one
Yeah.
city to another. So I think the ability to travel around China is insanely good. And I think that's only because of scalability. If you go to a huge country with a lower population, like Brazil or something, or the
Yeah.
Sudan, it's going to be much more difficult. It's really economically viable here in China because you have a city of 20 million people, and there's a
Yeah.
rail station. You're going somewhere where there's a population of 7 million people. And so, of course, you need really good logistics infrastructure to move people and things between those cities. So we're just benefactors, or not benefactors, we're benefiting from the reality that China has the scale of population to have that kind of infrastructure. And it's great. It's wonderful.
So what do you make of, you talked about scalability. What do you make of Peter Zehan's argument that China's population is going to decline, which will result in their declining economy? What do you make of that argument?
Oh gosh. Um, okay. Firstly, if you look at all developed countries in the world, there is a sociological phenomenon when countries enter into a certain degree of wealth, they stop having as many children. So if this is really easy to verify. You just look at the poor country and you look at the amount of kids that they have. You can look at the statistics really easy on like Our World in Data or some other place. And the poorer the country, the more kids that people have. The richer the
Yeah.
country, the less they have kids. So if you look at Japan, Germany, the United States, all of them have fewer children than in China, actually. Why? Because they are richer per capita. China is getting more prosperous, but it's not nearly as wealthy per capita
Yeah.
as the United States or Switzerland or Germany or France or whatever. It's going to get there a couple decades from now. It will be there. However, it is wealthy enough that people are having fewer children than they had in the past. Is there a population bomb of retirees going into retirement with fewer children? Not really. It's about the same as Japan or Canada or the United States. One of the advantages the United States has, it has a massive immigration. And China is not an immigration country. It's very difficult to move to China, actually. You have to be very highly educated, or you have to be very good at business, or you have to be attending a university or whatever to be able to move to China. So it's really a great opportunity for me to live here. I'm very happy, and but this is not replicatable by everyone who wants to move to China. So China does have a declining population over the next 50 and perhaps, because no one knows the future, over the next 75 years to 2100, according to UN estimates as well. However, if you look at countries like Japan, they're already hitting that wall. Japan's fine. It has some immigrant labor from the Philippines and stuff. And China is going to be fine for different reasons. More, like I said earlier, about an hour ago, an hour and 10 minutes ago, China has more factory automation than any other country in the world. China has more than half of all automation in manufacturing than the entire rest of the world combined. All countries, 100 and whatever amount you want to say, it's 205, 199. They're different estimates depending on how you put it together. But China has as much as all of those countries combined automation. And if you look at humanoid robots, you have the G1, already sold more than 1,000 models. A humanoid robot you can buy for $16,999. You have the R1 made by Unitree, which is $5,999. And you have probably in human, how many humanoids are going to be in China, in Chinese homes, doing our chores for us in 5 years? I'm guessing, and this is a bold guess and it could be wrong, 1 million. There'll be 1 million humanoids in China, better than the ones that Unitree or other companies are making now in China. And we also have automation in agriculture. We have advancements, green revolution, 2.0 in China. We have all kinds of advancements in agriculture and industry. And honestly, I don't really think China's going to have a problem. I think the automation and the inclusion of people who are not yet included in higher tiers of wealth. For example, in the United States, we have run out of cheap labor. So that's why so many Latin American immigrants are tertiarily allowed to operate in the United States, or have been at least for the last couple of decades, because no Americans are going to work for those prices. And so agriculture would collapse without immigration. In China, there are still, they're not people who live in absolute poverty, but there are people making less than $10 a day. And we're talking about tens of millions of people who have not yet been included in in China's unique modernity that is developing. So in 10 years, will we have a shortage of people? No. What China will do is absorb these people into urban areas and sectors of the economy that they are currently not needed and will be needed. So it's going to work out just fine for a variety of factors that Zehan just ignores for the sake of making his ridiculous argument.
No, I also feel the same way. Some people just talk for the sake of just talking and getting noticed, I guess. So, yeah, because once you dig deep into the argument, once you start analyzing it as an academic, then you start realizing there are different factors involved. Yeah, so yeah, I also don't agree with Peter Zehan that much, but I just wanted to get your take on it. Thanks, Jason. I've taken too much of your time. I realize it's been more than an hour and a half. You've been very generous with your time. Thank you for taking time to talk to me. It's been great talking to you. Is there anything else you want to say to my tiny audience?
Yeah, sure. I like to say this on my show too. Don't
Yeah.
take my word for it. You don't have to. I'm not asking anyone to follow me for the sake of believing me. Come to China if you can. I know it's not affordable for most people. If you want to know what China's like and you want to maybe come to China and say, whoa, Jason was right or Jason was wrong, come to China. We don't agree with anyone. Don't agree with Zehan or other people or people who love China, people who hate China. Come to China. Make up your own mind. See it for yourself. You deserve to see it for yourself. If China is something that you're curious about, you want to know about, come here, see it for yourself. Then you'll know who's actually telling you the truth.
No,
Thank you
that's
for
a
your
great
time
advice.
also.
Yeah. No, no, thanks. Okay. Lived experience is always better, I guess. So yeah, hopefully we get through all the propaganda and everybody comes to the senses, I guess, and make this world a better place. I guess. Hopefully next year there would be no trade war. Everybody
I
would
hope
be
so
working
too. I
together.
hope so too.
Yeah, I hope so too. Thank you very much, Jason. Thanks for your
Thank
time.
you. Thank you.
Again, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, and have a great day. I'll stop recording now. Thanks.